Hello, fellow writers. Today we're going to examine the work of James Pope-Hennessy. He was born in London in 1916, that's during the First World War. He came from an upper-class Irish Catholic family. His father was in the military. His mother was also a writer. She wrote books about the French Revolution, about secret societies. She wrote a number of biographies, including one about Edgar Allan Poe, who's one of my favorite writers, and a writer I intend to do probably a couple of videos about sometime. James attended Balliol College, Oxford, and at the tender age of 23, he won the Hawthornden Prize for his book, London Fabric. We're going to look at several excerpts from that book today. So the Hawthornden Prize was awarded to authors under the age of 41 on the merits of their imaginative literature, whether in prose or poetry. I think you'll see that James Pope-Hennessy was an excellent candidate for this award. So let's dive right in. I'm going to start off by reading some excerpts from the chapter entitled Crypts. I made Perdita promise before we went down to the crypt to tell me frankly whether she liked it. I did this because I have found by experience that crypts are rather a special, not to say an acquired taste. This taste for the subterranean I attribute entirely to Harrison Ainsworth. As a child, I early developed a passion for this neglected author, and at one moment I insisted on keeping both Windsor Castle and the Tower of London beside the nightlight on my bedroom table. Later on at school, I read and reread all his work, reveling in the complicated, gloomy stories of dungeons and tombs, underground torture rooms, graveyard trysts, owls, bats, murders, and mandrakes. It was a feast to stimulate anyone's appetite for the macabre. And even more formative than the natural genius of the author, there were the Cruikshank illustrations of the edition in the school library. Sunday after Sunday, I would sit all day over these books, and my eyes, tired out with reading the small tight print, I would peer into the twilit world of the engravings, those dim chambers where cloaked figures glide between squat, twisted pillars, where coffins burst open and revealed their ghastly secrets, and skeletons are heaped recklessly in odd corners, their wrists riveted and chained. There was an exciting, three-dimensional quality about these pictures. One felt one could crawl into the long, eerie passages and join in the ghoulish games of hide-and-seek going on there between assassins and their victims, body-snatchers and the night watch, doomed, bony Catholic prisoners and Tudor minions. I remember especially the hideous death of Lady Ravenswood, shown suffocating in the marble sarcophagus where she had rashly sought refuge. Soon my whole life was overshadowed by the world of the Gothic novel. Ruins and tombstones became a predominating interest of existence, and half-holidays were spent combing Somersetshire woods and villages. One church particularly, not very far from school, standing alone in a steep wooded valley, a chain of 5 stagnant lakes beside it, I constantly visited. The graveyard was full of rickety Caroline tombstones, with crude whorls of decoration, and the names, many times repeated, of the few prosperous families of the village on the hill. More interesting still were the visible traces in the field beyond the churchyard wall of another village which, once clustering around the deserted church, had been wiped out by the Black Death. The surface of the field was broken by long, low barrows, quite different from those of the Roman camp on the other side of the Fosse Way. These, it seemed tolerably certain, marked the site of the plague pits. The grass of the field always seemed to me peculiarly lush and sinister, but looking back, I find it hard to believe that this was the continued effect of 14th century corpses. This church, which, having no regular vicar, was seldom used, became, when I was between the ages of 12 and 13, the Mecca of my daily life. I have never minded being alone, and often I would spend whole misty winter afternoons sitting on a table tomb in the graveyard, reading Ainsworth and muffled up in a woolen scarf. Other days I would spend tramping through the neighboring wood in my gumboots, watching for a pair of owls which nested in the lichened depths of a deserted mill by one of the ponds. Owls and bats fitted naturally into my Gothic scheme, and one day, to my delight, I found a dazed bat lying on the floor of the church. Taking it back with me, I kept it for some weeks, feeding it on squalid fragments of raw meat. Soon I wanted to add others to it, and the systematic search for bats began to occupy my spare time. All that I now remember of this curious phase is the creaking, peevish cry of the bats, and, in contrast, the soft and sibilant names, noctule, pipistrelle, of the various species. I remember, too, the scared surprise of bluff Somersetshire vicars, begged for permission to scrabble about among the bell wheels of the church tower on my unwholesome errand. Okay, I'd just like to say, I really do love the idea of a young English schoolboy going around to churches and collecting bats. So let's read on. In the process of expansion and aptly called growing up, one's first benefactor becomes quickly submerged in the mind. With Ainsworth, this ingratitude was inevitable. I have never reread his novels, nor do I think I should enjoy doing so. It is the old providence of the right man at the right time. To turn back to Ainsworth, to find his style verbose, his plots absurd, the harrowing pictures merely so many 19th century grotesques, would be foolish and depleting. But these whiffs of the macabre, like Proust's magic morsels of Madeleine, lose their effect on repetition. It is the sudden stab of memory, the picture of the dark school library after high mass on Sunday, or the cold, crisp morning walks to some Gothic belfry on the horizon, across Somerset fields full of mushrooms and mist, or the silence of the empty church by the wood, and the funny way the ground shelves up on the north side to the distant ramshackle farm. Okay, now let's talk about this for a minute. These whiffs of the macabre, the sudden stab of memory, Somerset fields full of mushrooms and mist. Writing like this does more than just describe. It transports the reader to another time and place. This is the mundane magic of words, that they allow one mind to commune with another. They allow pictures and images and feelings and moods to flow from the brain of one person to that of another by means of sounds and symbols. James Pope-Hennessy, at the age of 21, commanded a formidable arsenal of writerly tools. And we can improve our writing enormously by studying great writers like him and imitating the techniques they used to make their words come alive. So how do we do this? The trick is to engage the senses of the reader. Rather than just describe the bats as creepy or with some vague adjective, we describe the quality of the sounds they make, or the texture of their skin. And by so doing, we make pictures in the mind of the reader. But it's not just a question of describing the details of the way a bat looks. Word choice is hugely important. For example, you can describe a bat's wings as leathery or velveteen or like the skin of a frog. And each of those words, each of those descriptions is going to have a different effect on the reader. There's also the question of associations, but I think I'll save that for another episode. So let's move on. This next passage is also from London Fabric from the chapter on Dulwich. Spring in England, though it has evident beauties, which Browning, for one, appreciated better than I, does not move me like the subtle melancholy of October. At school, I looked forward to the Somerset autumn, which meant for me purplish wild orchids and a larch wood I knew of, blackberries rich on the hedges, and the streams all choked with fallen leaves. In the north of England, on the Tees, where we lived for 4 years, autumn was shorter and more sombre, bleak sharp winds blowing off the moors, and the coppices prematurely bare. Oxford, in Michaelmas term, when it is not raining, can give one autumn at its best. The trees in the college quadrangles shed their leaves mournfully, slowly, dropping them one by one. The narrow, mossy paths of Addison's Walk behind Magdalen are crisp under one's feet with the crackling of twigs and the rustling of the dry leaves swept into neat piles by the gardener's brush beneath the tall grey elms. Then, too, you can walk over to Boar's Hill, your breath making funnels of vapor in the cold transparency of the air, or you can go, trespassing, through Witham Woods or along the towpath to Iffley. Best of all, I like to go across the level tranquillity of Port Meadow, broad and golden, with the steady flowing river ranked by trees, cows, and riding figures in the distance, like a Hobbema landscape. To eastward, the ruined walls of Godstow Nunnery, where Rosamond Clifford, Henry II's mistress, is reputed to lie buried, with their broken Gothic arches standing thinly up against the high October sky. But always I think that London, in the autumn, is surpassed by none of these. The trees in the Mall turning russet, the white mists gathering low over the Serpentine, the Strand at its most mysterious at 6 o'clock of an October evening, and the river which, seen from the Temple Garden, looks remote and inky dark. They shift smoothly and forever, the worlds within worlds that the city of London contains, changing with the seasons and the hours of the day, the light altering continually on the facades of the buildings and the faces of the streets. It is all so strange and so lovely, and so near at hand. This is a bewitching evocation of autumn. This is the type of writing I have to read several times because there's so much packed in there that it's easy to miss some of the details and some of the images. It's plain to see that James Pope-Hennessy was obviously a master at describing settings and places. And now let's look at how he describes an individual. in this case the Duchess of Windsor. Her name was Wallis Simpson, and King Edward VIII of England abdicated so he could marry her. And this is from a book called A Lonely Business, which is a collection of Pope-Hennessy's writings edited by Peter Quennell. Here we go. This is one of the very oddest women I have ever seen. It is impossible to assess what makes her function or why. I should say she was on the whole a stupid woman, with a small petty brain, immense goodwill, and a stern power of concentration. Like her house, she is tremendously American, and specifically Southern. It was like being back in Montgomery, Alabama without the tree moss. I should therefore be tempted to classify her simply as an American woman par excellence, were it not for the suspicion that she is not a woman at all. She is, to look at, phenomenal. She is flat and angular, and could have been designed for a medieval playing card. The shoulders are small and high, the head very, very large, almost monumental. The expression is either anticipatory, signaling to one, "I know this is going to be loads of fun, don't you?" or appreciative, the great gig-lamp smile, the wide, wide open eyes, which are so very large and pale and veined, the painted lips, and the cannibal teeth. There is one further facial contortion reserved for speaking of the Queen Mother, which is very unpleasant to behold, and seemed to me akin to frenzy. I only got this one completely on the last evening. She is wildly good-natured and friendly, but with both of them, one somehow feels that so much enthusiasm might suddenly gel up, and one would be in the limbo reserved for the many, many people who have treated them badly or turned out a disappointment. I like having my jokes laughed at, but there is no need to make the millbeams rock with appreciation of them. Her high, smooth, flat forehead is cloven by a deep, singly vertical line of concentration. Her neck makes her age, 61, apparent, a tendency to wattles. Her jawbone is alarming, and from the back you can plainly see it jutting beyond the neck on each side. All right, well, that's what happens when he turns his Hannibal Lecter-like powers of observation on a mere human being. It's amusing, but it's brutal. That's it for this time. I hope you've enjoyed this exploration of James Pope-Hennessy's work, and here's the takeaway. Observe, learn to see, hear, smell, keep a journal, and be on the lookout for great writing. Study it, think about it, imitate it, master it. Thanks for watching, and if you're looking for a ripping yarn to read, check out The Night Whisperer by Ornella Gray. You'll find a link in the description. And until next time, happy writing.